Hello. It's an unusual day today because I am bringing myself to do episode 108 of my podcast, iAntonio.media, and I've been inspired by an article that I recently heard of through one of my favorite creators on TikTok. And it inspired me in such a way, not necessarily that I agree with everything it said, that I thought that I should do a little commentary on this article. The name of this article is AI Can Give Answers, but the future belongs to students who can think beyond the machine. That's the title, not exactly the name, but the title. So, on this, the 14th of May 2026, this is my little put together, and it's an unusual format that I'm approaching today because as we speak, I am dictating this somehow, freely. And from this, I hope to do an article that speaks to the same thing, for those of you who prefer to read. To start out, I'm going to say the real educational challenge of the AI age is not to access answers. It is maintaining human clarity, ownership, and self-regulation while thinking with machines. AI does not merely change productivity. It changes the conditions under which humans think, write, decide, reflect, and understand themselves. Therefore, the future of education is not simply AI adoption. It is the design of learning environments that preserve ownership, reflection, context awareness, and human judgment, while collaborating with increasingly powerful systems. Now, that is my thought. So what I'm going to do is, of course, this article is going to be published for all of you to read, but I'm going to approach it this way. I will be giving my take on, not really my take, but a kind of a response to what the article says by giving snippets of their own conversation, their own arguments, and then giving my take just after. Of course, I'll be including the link so you can check out the article for yourself. It's from two Indian professors. I cannot really pronounce these names. I'm not going to attempt, but there is one, A. Dhawan and P. Rajzina. I hope I didn't butcher these names, but, much respect to these men and or these persons. And here is my little response on this, the 14th of May. 2026. Now, in starting all of this, I'm gonna start with, let's say, a question. I wanna challenge what I call the shallow public debate. And, speaking of, debates and emotions, charged emotions, agreements, disagreements, creative tension, if you might. I recently lost a friendship just because I decided to celebrate my work with AI. And, to this day, it's been about, 3 months now, since that person demonstrably decided not to associate with me anymore because I choose to use AI. And, I'm not going to call any names, but I think a lot of people share that sentiment to some degree. I don't know if they would go as far as writing off a friendship based on that, but this one did. And, it hurts a little bit, but, I have other regrets in life. And as Jay-Z would say, I have 99 problems. Anyway, parents ask whether AI will replace essays, for example, for their kids. And students ask whether degrees still matter. Teachers ask whether writing itself is dying. And, beneath all of these fears, beneath these questions, right, there are other things we might ask ourselves. For example, what happens to human thinking when answers become permanently available? Now, that leads us to the conclusion, where we might say that the real educational crisis is not the machines. It's not the machines answering questions. It is that humans may slowly stop recognizing themselves in the thinking process. That is the threat. That is also something that I think about sometimes. And I can understand why people might feel that fear of eventually losing themselves. Now, that is kind of something that pushes this commentary. And I hope I have, captured your attention somehow. I'm going to be speaking from my experience with AI, building systems, and also from the reflection that I've made, the conversations I've had with myself on how I feel, how things are unfolding, to what extent I am losing my voice or adjusting my voice to fit to what the machine expects, understands, or can work with. Now, over the past few months, we have moved away from what was very popularly termed prompt engineering to what we now call context engineering. This is central because, I've already identified something important. AI quality depends less on isolated prompts and more on sustained context, constraints, history, intention, and framing. Now, that might sound like something I just got from a book or something, but when you think of language and rhetoric and interpretive disciplines, political discourse, law, literature, teaching, and mediation, all of these things depend on context. And one could ask oneself, is it really different when I say that we've moved away from prompting to focusing on context creation? How different is that really from what we do as, lawyers, teachers, politicians? And as I said, any career that involves interpretive faculties. Now, I'm just going to read a bit from the article that I told you about earlier. And in the article, it says, the quality of the answer is, in the end, governed by the quality of asking. For curious minds, that is an ever-present opportunity to expand learning, to go deeper across topics, and follow an idea further than it has ever been possible before. In adding my thoughts to that, I would say that this speaks to the key idea of context and how prompt engineering, as I've said before, has evolved into context engineering. And the unexpected full circle of creating the best generations with, for example, traditional language of photography, as opposed to just saying, paint me or generate me a beautiful picture. A play with language is exactly what we do, especially in interpretive fields such as law, political science, or the arts. And I suspect that AI's progress at elegantly matching patterns threatens the world of the wordsmith. Now, that was, just my way of saying it at the time. That's how I framed it. And of course, it is subject then to amendment. The article goes on to speak about rebuilding the education experience around holistic learning, critical reasoning, and breadth. And breadth here does not mean the dilution of the whole experience. It means awareness across domains, the instinct to connect ideas, and the ability to think and write clearly. Now, my thoughts on this are that it is interesting to me in this era. As a language teacher, I find the reemergence, it seems, of the importance of language and communication skills to be quite engaging. It helps to shape context much more effectively. The newest evolution, it seems, is a kind of a cross-cultural competence in that one, being first clear about your own context as a human being in terms of your intentions, drives, motivations, and interests, or we could say just knowing ourselves. And then two, mediating or transferring these contexts into a machine or system readable form without losing fluency and, without losing connection to your own medium. It's like maintaining a bridge between two riverbanks such that the portals remain intact. I was often faced with this challenging experience while vibe coding Zibille, where I was a little fearful that I might lose my own natural language. And the builder might either not be able to understand what it is I mean if I speak in my full language, or I might adjust it too much that I lose connection to my own language. And, I ask myself, how much is lost in translation? And to what extent am I being influenced to go in one direction? Or am I, let's say, restricting the natural intelligence of my own builder by being too rigidly fixated on or limited by the horizons of my own affinity for projection or my capacity for imagination? I ask myself, how different is the discourse among human cultures? Isn't it the same thing we go through? Don't we go through the same conundrums? I've long argued, I don't know if it's out of some kind of sense of hope or whatever, that I suspect that artificial intelligence will one day take us closer to our humanness. And this is a little gem, one of the gems that I've been carrying around for quite a while. And, I still tend to believe that. And why do I believe that? Now, we've just established that this new work with context, this new focus on context and nuance, it is something that all of us do. We've already been doing that with our interpretive faculties, as I mentioned, the politicians, the lawyers, and, literature, all of that, intercultural communications all have to do with interpreting the subtle differences, the subtleties of language. And AI is something that is causing us to, again, move away from just the prompt engineering to the context engineering, which is framing of whole worlds, so to speak, while being well aware of what you are, who you are, what your intentions are, being focused on maintaining that, not losing that in translation, and transferring this to and fro in an effective way such that you don't lose your message or yourself. Context now matters more. Nuance now matters more. Interpretation, transfer, and clarity. And among all of this, for years, people have assumed that technology would reduce the importance of language. And here we are today, trying to improve our context and making sure that our communication is effective. The educational challenge is no longer merely producing work. It is remaining visible to yourself inside this work. That sounds a little bit simple, and I'm gonna rephrase it, right? It's not just about getting results out of the AI, but being true, remaining true and visible to yourself inside this work. Now, this is the center, so to speak, of what attracted me to this article in the first place. Because, as you know, as I've mentioned before, I've been working over the past, I would say, 18 months on my AI tutor. She specializes in advanced level English for the German Abitur in Berlin, Brandenburg. And she's finished. I'm actually at the stage now where, I have to hold myself back a little bit from the building because, I'm still tweaking things. However, I'm actually in a stage now where I should be telling everybody about what Sibylla can do. Now, coming back to the reason why this article really attracted me. Inside Zabilla, I've spent so much time working on building in reflection, encouraging students to reflect. I've built in concept questioning, ownership checks, and these mean that when Zabilla helps a student with producing a piece of work, she goes through a series of questions to ask, as she, find out, to ascertain to what degree the student actually owns this piece of work. And all of these things are built into what I call the pre-flight philosophy. The pre-flight philosophy, pre-flight meaning before you give your work out, you reflect and you ask yourself the question, to what extent is this work really mine? So it encourages reasoning, it encourages critical thinking. Zabilla encourages their ownership and reduces the uncertainty of not really knowing what the AI helped you to produce. It enriches, solidifies, or concretizes their own understanding of the work. And this ties in directly to what I was talking about earlier, that, in order to work with machines, in order to shape prompts and contexts, more importantly, we have to know ourselves. We have to know our own intentions and be aware of these things going forward in order to get the best work. Now, another thing that this kind of reflection is built into is what I call PLP, which is Personal Learning Plan Trajectories. And these are little sections where students can ask Zabilla randomly to give them help with any particular thing that they're struggling with in school. Now, it could be anything. It could be false friends. It could be a time form. It could be a simple grammar topic. It could be the fact that a student feels less than confident in front of a classroom. So I'm not speaking just from theory here. I'm speaking here from hands-on experience. I'm speaking here from building systems based on 18 years of teaching experience, and also based on the responses that I've received from my own builder and the real responses that Zabilla now produces as a functioning MVP, minimum viable product, right? So, this is all coming from somewhere. And, I'd be happy to explain a little bit more about how this whole philosophy ties into Zabilla. But, I'm just going to leave that for there right now. Now, there is a kind of a romanticizing of the struggle that sometimes happens when we talk about the old ways of doing things. Now, the article I mentioned earlier, the same article, it says, AI is at its best when it is helpful and obliging. College is where you learn to be tested. When digital tools today can produce comprehensive answers in just a click, the patience, discipline, and sometimes discomfort of working out an answer for yourself becomes more valuable and not less. Now, there is some truth to that. In terms of discomfort, as I'm sitting here now, it's 14:25 and my plan is to go to the gym after this and pump some iron. Yes. And in the gym, we say no pain, no gain. And there is some truth to that. If I don't work to failure, I will not see benefits. I will not give my body the signal to improve itself. So, I'm not one to say that struggle is, something that we should totally reject. But at the same time, we shouldn't over-romanticize the struggle. None of us wants to plow the soil with our bare hands for the authenticity of it. The key distinction here is that not all friction is valuable. The goal is not artificial suffering and the glorification of such. The powers that be used that notion together with their preferred interpretation of scripture to subjugate, disenfranchise, and oppress the masses of nations in the past. Let's not forget that chapter. Don't suffer more than you should, right? And don't celebrate inefficiencies and don't reject tools because, you feel as if, well, you need to be authentic. I mean, there's so many things that I've gone through. I mean, I have worked for, I don't know, I think I started 3 years. Yes, I started 3 years. And I worked about 4 years as a quantity surveyor, which is in German, we call a Bauvermesser. And I'm sure computers can do all of that work now. I've worked as well as a photographer. And there is a lot that artificial intelligence can do now. Hardly anybody, well, yeah, of course, if you want the experience of going for a photo shoot in a studio, of course you can. But there's a lot that can be done with artificial intelligence. And I'm not saying that it has totally taken away the whole, let's say, job or art of photography. But there's a lot that can be done, And as I said earlier as well, what really matters is the language of photography itself. Because these days, if you want to get good work, you're gonna have to speak the good language, coming back again to the language of photography. So yes, some of it is lost, but all of it is not lost. And there are people, when I got into photography, they told me, yeah, you're doing digital photography. Yeah, you're not real. Yes, if you didn't do analog photography. And, I just laughed at it and continued doing the same thing. And I also used to laugh at people taking iPhone photography. And these days, I put my camera aside sometimes and just use my iPhone, whether it be to record something, to photograph something, or to even shoot a video. And, that's just how technology is. We have to adopt new ways and we have to adapt our practices to these new ways, right? So again, don't celebrate the artificial suffering too much, and this over glorification of suffering, right? It's sometimes not to our best interest, and it only serves those individuals or institutions or systems that are invested in the old way of doing things. They want to get their money out first before everybody switches over. We've spoken about judgment. We've spoken about ownership. And discernment is another word that I'd throw into the mix. We've spoken about reflection and intentionality. Now, all of these things help to define what we want, who we are, and, generally our intentions, what we want from the work we're doing with AI. Now, I've waxed a little bit of lyrical about not over romanticizing the struggle, but at the same time, I was true to myself. A little struggle is also good, especially coming from me, a gym goer. As I said, I'm going to the gym a little after this. And, as we say, no pain, no gain. But, it's all in its right measure. The next point I want to make here is, again, in connection to the idea of our humanness. And I'm going to start with a little excerpt from another article I did that had to do with something called liminality. Here is an insight that draws upon patterns across art, language, and learning. The most profound growth in these areas often arises not from mastery, but from navigating liminal spaces in between. The in-between states where discomfort, ambiguity, and exploration are at their peak. Liminality, the space between the known and the unknown. Whether in art, language, or education, the transformative moments happen when we embrace the messy, ambiguous, and imperfect. These in-between spaces are where creativity, innovation, and understanding truly flourish. Now, again, yeah, some of us see AI as a kind of a perfection, and maybe it is, but it is not what we are. Perhaps the future value of humanity will not lie in competing with machine perfection, but in understanding the meaning of, as said, ethics, intention, and emotional reality behind the perfectly imperfect human experience. So, it's all about living the language, and that is the name I gave to my podcast years ago, adding a splash of color and life to the learning experience. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode today. I hope you enjoyed this article. And as I always say, with a small win is always a good way to begin. I am looking forward to hearing from you, and bye for now.